The city of Ravenwood, a quiet and picturesque location, hid a dark history that involved a central square. During the day, the place used to be a meeting point for families, where children played on the swings and adults enjoyed the sun. However, at night, the atmosphere changed drastically. Over time, the square was neglected and abandoned, turning into a dark and forbidden place. The grass grew tall and wild, the flowers withered, and the trees, once majestic, were now just twisted shadows. Ravenwood began to avoid the place at night, and macabre stories began to circulate about the cursed square. That night, a full moon hung in the sky, casting its silvery light over the sleeping city. The city was silent, the streets were deserted, and the houses were shrouded in darkness. However, there was someone who dared to challenge the square's sinister reputation: Lucas, a fearless young man who had heard of the stories and was determined to explore the place to discover the truth. Lucas was a young man with curious eyes and an adventurous spirit. He had always been drawn to the unknown, and the abandoned square presented a challenge he could not resist. With an LED flashlight in hand and courage in his heart, he headed to the square after midnight. The light of the full moon bathed the place, creating ominous shadows that moved mysteriously. Lucas began walking down the path that led him to the center of the square, watching the shadows twist and dance around him. The night wind whispered unintelligible words, as if the square itself was trying to tell its secrets. The grass was tall, and dry leaves crunched beneath Lucas's feet as he walked forward. The wind seemed to carry with it the whispers of the past, inaudible voices that enveloped it. The atmosphere was tense, and Lucas felt like he was being watched by an invisible eye. As he approached the center of the square, he began to notice something strange. Pale, translucent figures seemed to appear between the trees, gliding like shadows across the grass. Their forms were ethereal, as if they belonged to a world beyond human reach. Lucas paused for a moment, watching the apparitions in shock. He turned on his flashlight to better illuminate the place, revealing the spectral figures that slowly moved around him. It was as if the square's past was coming to life, and the young man couldn't understand what he saw. The whispering voices carried by the wind became more audible, like murmurs from a forgotten time. Lucas tried to discern the words, but they were strange and incoherent, as if they belonged to an ancient language. He felt a shiver run down his spine and realized he was facing something that was beyond human understanding. As his flashlight swept across the square, one figure in particular stood out in the center of the place. It was a woman in a white dress with long black hair that fluttered in the night wind. Their eyes were empty, as if they had lost all light and life. She extended a spectral hand toward Lucas, as if inviting him to join her in the darkness. Lucas's heart hammered in his chest, and fear dominated him. He tried to step back, but his legs felt petrified. The woman in white continued to approach, her footsteps causing the dry grass beneath her feet to turn into ash. Lucas could feel the coldness of the approaching ghostly presence. Then the woman whispered his name, a faint whisper that seemed to echo in the back of his mind. He heard his name, repeated countless times in an incessant whisper. It was as if the square itself was calling him, as if voices from the past had chosen him as their next target. Lucas was paralyzed with fear, his eyes fixed on the woman in white who was approaching. The incessant whispers of the wind seemed to echo in his ears, making him even more aware of the ghostly presence in front of him. The night was permeated with an unearthly atmosphere, and the young man felt that he was on the verge of a terrible secret. The woman, with empty eyes and long black hair, was now a few steps away from Lucas. She continued to whisper his name, the sound becoming louder and more enveloping with each passing second. Fear gripped him, but there was something in the woman's expression that intrigued him. It was as if there was a deep sadness in his lifeless eyes. Lucas finally found the strength to step back, moving away from the woman. He realized he needed to get away from there, that place was haunted by forces he didn't understand. His heart beat wildly as he walked away, the flashlight in his shaking hands. As he moved, the spectral figures around the square seemed to follow his footsteps, gliding and dancing in the shadows. The whispering voices continued, as if trying to tell ancient stories lost in time. He ran towards the exit of the square, the night wind howling and carrying with it the murmurs of the past. The shadows seemed to reach out, reaching for him like tentacles, but he finally emerged from the square, his heart pounding and his breathing ragged. Back in the safety of the city streets, Lucas tried to make sense of what he had witnessed. He wondered if the apparitions and whispers were real or a figment of his imagination. The night in the square haunted him, and he couldn't escape the feeling that something much deeper and darker was at play. In the days that followed, Lucas began researching the history of the square and its macabre stories. As daylight illuminated the city's shadowy details, he discovered that, many decades ago, the square had been the scene of a terrible event. A woman named Isabella had been accused of witchcraft and unjustly convicted. The city's population believed that the square was a cursed place, and she had been burned at the stake there on a sinister night under accusations of forbidden magical practices. The city had tried to erase this part of its history, but the past seemed to resurface in the appearances and whispers of the square. Lucas felt he had a mission to accomplish. He could not leave Isabella's story unanswered, nor ignore the curse that seemed to still hang over the abandoned square. He decided that he needed to return to the square, understand what was happening there, and, if possible, free the tormented souls that roam the shadows. With iron determination, he planned his return to the square, but he was aware that this would be an even more dangerous journey full of unrevealed secrets. He had a feeling that what he would discover would be beyond his understanding, but he couldn't back down now. The square's curse had chosen to reveal its secrets, and Lucas was willing to face the unknown. Lucas was determined to unravel the mysteries of the abandoned square and free the tormented souls that haunted it. With renewed courage, he prepared for his return to that ominous landscape. The following night, under a full moon that cast its silver light over the city, Lucas returned to the square. He approached slowly, the LED flashlight illuminating the path in front of him. The tall grass and gnarled trees looked even more menacing in the moonlight, but he didn't flinch. As Lucas entered the square, the whispers of the wind returned, as if the night itself whispered forbidden secrets. The shadows surrounding him writhed and danced, as if trying to stop him from moving forward. However, he continued to advance, determined to understand what was happening in that mysterious place. In the center of the square, he stopped at the place where he had seen the woman in the white dress. The area seemed charged with a dark and oppressive energy. Lucas knew he had to face the square's past, uncover Isabella's story, and perhaps find a way to free the tormented souls. He collected pieces of candles and a bouquet of flowers he had brought with him. Carefully, he lit the candles, placing them in a circle around him. The flickering flames created an even more sinister atmosphere, making the shadows dance in a grotesque manner. Lucas paused, feeling a heavy feeling in the air. The whispering voices grew louder, more insistent, as if the spirits in the square were trying to communicate. He took a deep breath and began to speak out loud, addressing the tormented souls. "I know you are here, and I know that something terrible happened in this square. Whoever you are, I ask that you tell me your story. I am not here to judge, but to help free you from your prisons." The candle flames seemed to respond to his speech, dancing with intensity. The night wind carried the whispers, making them more coherent, as if the voices had found a way to communicate. Lucas continued to speak, asking souls to share their story. He spoke about Isabella, the woman convicted of witchcraft, and asked anyone connected to the square's history to speak out. That's when the shadows came to life. One after another, the spectral figures emerged from the shadows, taking shape before Lucas. They were the spirits of those who had suffered at the hands of injustice, victims of the city's collective hysteria. An elderly man with a sad look approached, followed by a young woman with frightened eyes. Other spirits, each with their own story of suffering, joined them. They whispered their names, names that the city had forgotten, and began to tell the tragic story of Isabella and all who had suffered. Lucas listened intently, the story unfolding before his eyes. He learned that the town had unfairly accused Isabella of witchcraft out of envy of her knowledge of herbs and medicines. She had been subjected to a grotesque trial and finally burned at the stake in the square. The spirits also said that the curse that was plaguing the square was linked to the injustice that had occurred there. They were trapped, unable to find peace, until the truth was revealed and the injustice was righted. Lucas felt a deep sadness for the story that had unfolded before him. He knew he now had a responsibility to free the tormented souls and break the curse that hung over the square. With renewed determination, He asked the spirits to help him break the curse and find a way to give peace to Isabella and everyone else. The spirits agreed, knowing that together they could achieve the redemption they sought. The young man planned one last ritual, one that he hoped would seal the square's fate and free the tormented souls. He would need to bring significant objects, offerings, and words of redemption for the curse to be broken once and for all. The final night was approaching, and the fight to redeem the abandoned square was far from over. The fate of the abandoned square was about to be sealed, and Lucas was determined to fulfill his mission to redeem this haunted place. He knew the last ritual would be challenging, but he was willing to face the unknown to break the curse. On the final night, with the full moon illuminating the square, Lucas headed to that dark place once again. He carried with him significant objects, an old diary that had belonged to Isabella, herbs and flowers, and a medallion that had belonged to one of the tormented spirits. Everything was ready for the redemption ritual. Lucas arrived at the center of the square, where the candles were still lit, waiting to be relit. He lit the candles with a lantern and began the ritual, reciting words of forgiveness and redemption. The night wind whispered in agreement, as if the night itself supported his mission. As the words flowed from his mouth, the candles seemed to burn with a brighter, more intense flame. The heat of redemption filled the air, and the shadows of the square began to stir. The spirits, who had helped him tell the story and shared his pain, appeared around him. Luke asked the tormented souls to accept his offerings and the offer of forgiveness. He held out Isabella's diary to Isabella's spirit, handing her a last breath of her lost story. The young girl gratefully accepted the diary, and her empty eyes seemed to fill with emotion. Then he handed the locket to another spirit, a reminder of a life that had been unjustly taken. The spirits murmured words of acceptance and gratitude, and Lucas knew he was on the right path. The last step of the ritual involved the flowers and herbs he had brought. He began to spread them around the square, covering the ground with the offerings. As the petals touched the grass, the night became quieter, the whispering voices fading. With the ritual completed, Lucas knelt on the floor of the square, looking at the spirits that surrounded him. He asked the tormented souls to find the peace and liberation they so richly deserved. The energy of forgiveness and redemption seemed to surround them, and the young man had the feeling that something extraordinary was about to happen. Then, the square started to shake. The ground beneath his feet shook, and the shadows that had loomed over the place began to dissipate. It was as if the land itself was responding to the ritual of redemption. Lucas looked up at the night sky, where the moon shone with radiant intensity. A silvery light radiated from the square, enveloping it in a dazzling glare. It was as if the curse that haunted the place was being uprooted. The candles burned with a flame so bright it could barely be seen. The spirits, now serene and grateful, began to rise towards the light. They seemed to find peace and redemption as they walked away from the square, disappearing into the ether of the night. Lucas knew he had accomplished his mission, and the curse was finally being broken. As the square glowed with dazzling intensity, the shadows that had enveloped it for so many years completely disappeared. The night wind stopped whispering, and the night became quieter than ever. Lucas remained kneeling for a moment, observing the transformation of the square. He knew that the story of that place would be told as a scary story in the nights of Ravenwood, but now the square was no longer a place of fear, but of redemption. When he finally stood up, the square was transformed. The grass was green and lush. The gnarled trees now looked healthy, and the flowers were blooming in vivid colors. The city of Ravenwood had regained a place of beauty and joy, thanks to Lucas's courage and the redemption of the abandoned square. With one last look of gratitude, Lucas walked away from the square, knowing he had accomplished his mission. The stories of apparitions and whispers in that square would now be remembered as part of its history, but also as a testament to the redemption that was possible, even in the darkest of places. And so, the once cursed abandoned plaza was transformed into a symbol of hope and redemption in Ravenwood.